Let's use an example to explain this polymorphism further. So remember, when you create the Java code, you start with a compiler. Oops. Then followed by a runtime, right? You will compile your code, then run it in the runtime, Java virtual machine runtime. So when you define polymorphism, a superclass, for example, which is, we call it a graded activity. A graded activity. But indeed, when you use the new keyword to create a final exam object, which is in fact a final exam, right? Compiler only sees this as a graded activity. It does not see it's a final because you defined graded activity in the Java code. For this reason, let's call it E. For this reason, you can do a E dot set score. There's no problem because this E right now is a graded activity to the compiler. However, you cannot define this E as however, you cannot use the final exam questions like a number of questions. I don't, questions. This is wrong because to the compiler, it is not a final exam object. It's a graded activity exam. It's a graded activity object. You are defining this as graded activity. You are not defining this as a number of a final exam. That's why you can only use graded activity or superclass method instead of using a subclass method, right? But when you run this, runtime will be able to tell it's a final exam. So runtime will be able to go inside into this object and run its method. It has method listed here. Runtime will try to find the method within the object. So in this case, you can still run whatever is a method of this final exam, even if it's a subclass version. So runtime can see the true object with the fundamental definition, the nearest definition, the real definition of a method, which is the subclass definition. But compiler cannot see the object because it hasn't been created yet. It can only identify the type that you define. For this reason, if you want to use polymorphism, you will first define the grade, define the superclass. Define subclass method to override superclass method. And overriding is the very important part of this polymorphism because the second part is define superclass variables, which is actually subclass instances. And the third part. So this, in the second part, you are defining this graded activity. You are defining this graded activity, which is actually a final exam. And the third part is use overriding overridden methods of the variables. JVM will find the proper version of the method, which is the subclass version, if there is a subclass version. Okay, so this is polymorphism. You define a set of graded activity or superclass variables, and what you call the overridden method, Java virtual machine knows to find the proper method, proper version of method.